Hi, Stewart. Hi, everybody. You're very welcome to the Agriculture, Food Systems and Bioeconomy Research Centre of the Rhine Institute here at the University of Galway. This is going to be a monthly webinar series, and we welcome everyone from students to PIs. You're all very, very welcome. Now, agriculture, food systems and bioeconomy is a very, very broad church. And it's so important that this interdisciplinary research centre meets together at these webinars and at any other fora possible, because we know that food systems, agriculture and bioeconomy are seen as one of 6 key entry points to getting the SDGs back on track. So interdisciplinary work in this field is absolutely critical. Not just promoting, as these webinars will do, advances in cutting edge science, but also to see how far we can push this interdisciplinary science in the interface with policy and society. So today, our speaker is Stewart G, and Stewart is from EIT Climate KIC. Stewart's background is in agriculture and environmental sciences and humanitarian action with qualifications from UCD. Stewart spent 20 years working in sustainable agricultural development programs in low and middle-income countries, and he's joined EIT Climate KIC to work in partnership with the Department of Agriculture in Ireland to find ways of bridging the gap between the reality of emissions in our agri-food systems and our ambitious targets. And that's what Stewart is going to talk to us today about. So please put your questions for Stewart into the chat function, and over to you, Stewart, now for your presentation on these deep demonstrations.
Hi all, I think some of you may have met me before. For those of you who haven't, I think Anne has already given me a bit of an introduction, making me sound older than I am with 20 years experience already. But yeah, I spent most of my career working in international development, and just 2.5 years ago, found myself working for EIT Climate KIC on this project called the Ireland Land Agri-Food Deep Demonstration, which I'll explain to you a little bit about now. Sorry, just get my slides changing here. If anybody, if the slides aren't working or anything like that, just let me know. I'm notoriously bad at following chat while I'm speaking, so I'll do my best. So one of the first questions we kind of get asked a lot of the time is, who the hell are Climate KIC? So our full name is EIT Climate KIC. So we're part of the European Innovation and Technology Network. And we are the climate, and the KIC stands for Knowledge Innovation Community. So we are more than just us as an organization. We have a whole community of members and networks that we engage with across Europe. We will be losing our EIT funding at the end of this year. We've had it for 15 years and transitioning to a foundation model where we'll be kind of working on a service-based model. So just to give an idea of what we do, so we work on probably hundreds of projects all across Europe. I'm out of the, what do we call it, the Resilient and Climate Neutral Regions cluster. So within that cluster, we have about 30 projects, of which the Ireland Land Agri-Food Deep Demonstration is one. We work with governments as well as regions and companies and foundations and all that kind of stuff all across Europe and across the world indeed. Some of the biggest initiatives we work on, this project that I'm working on in Ireland is kind of a fairly, kind of like one of our flagship initiatives, I guess. But we also work on the cities mission for the EU, or for the Commission. So we host the platform for net zero cities, where over 100 cities across Europe are all aiming to be net zero by 2030, which is a tall ask. And we also manage the platform for Pathways to Resilience, which is a similar concept, but on a regional basis rather than on a cities basis. And there's a few other ones mentioned here that we work on as well, just to give you an idea that it's not just agri-food, we work on lots of different things. So I have to try and tell you all about this in the next 15 to 20 minutes to give time for questions. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about the challenge of decarbonising the agri-food system in Ireland, because you'll know a lot of this already. I suppose the key point here is that agriculture is worth a huge amount to our rural economy, and it is not sustainable to wipe that out overnight. So any kind of transition needs to be economically viable, environmentally viable, and socially viable. And I think that's the critical piece to remember, that it's not about massive silver bullet solutions to one problem that will create other problems. There's always a balancing act in these things. We have set ourselves ambitious targets. Likelihood is we won't reach them, but aim high, miss high, I guess, is the mantra we're kind of working on. So why us? So the partnership with ourselves and the Department of Agriculture was actually listed as an action in Food Vision 2030. For those of you who haven't read it, there's 230 actions in there, and we're one of the actions under Mission 4. And basically, the department kind of said, well, okay, you're Europe's largest innovation agency. Can you come in here and help us to close the gap between where we think we can get to and where we have to get to? So that is essentially was initially at least our mandate. How we do it is we're very much about co-designing interventions. So it's very much demand-led. Now, we don't do anything ourselves. We have to work with others, build collaborations to get everything done. And our kind of theory for systems change is that if you want to shift a system, you have to pull all the levers of change at the same time. It's not about one project here, one project there. You've got to do it all together. So what we have developed out with our stakeholders is a portfolio of large-scale interconnected interventions. And I'll talk about some of those a little bit later. The other thing that Climate KIC tries to bring to the table is this learning by doing approach. Never let perfection be the enemy of good. A lot of things we just don't know. We can't foresee everything. We can't model and plan everything. So just go and do it to the best of our ability, but take the time and build the systems to reflect and learn and iterate and make it better as we go. And that's very much what our approach has been in this project. So I suppose before I just get onto the deep demonstration process, this is the kind of the graphic that sums up what we do. We are in phase 2. So we had 2 years funding initially from the department, which finished at the end of February this year, and the department decided to extend that by another 2 years. So we are currently in our second phase of working on this. So we spent a lot of time on the first few bits of this this process here in front of you. Building intent. We actually didn't have to spend too much time on that initially on a shared understanding because the Food Vision 2030 had just been launched. So most stakeholders are pretty much aligned around that. Kind of hard to argue with the 4 missions in Food Vision. They are all very ambitious, and I suppose they're appropriate. So there's no need to reinvent the wheel there. I guess when you talk about building intent, it's an ongoing process, though. You know, you need to get people to commit to doing things, not just nod their heads and say, "Oh yeah, no, that sounds good." So there's a continuous process there. Then we work on co-designing the intervention strategy, so mapping the system, identifying the intervention areas, creating spaces to discuss and learn things. So that's the building of our portfolio essentially. Move on to portfolio development then, which is looking at, okay, we've agreed on what we want to work on. So then develop out detailed implementation plans for each of those things, build collaborations to deliver those things, find the financing to deliver those things, and to define the success metrics. So we're kind of in a little bit of that phase at the moment, and also a little bit of the next phase. It's intelligence and insights. So this is where we do the learning by doing piece, where we really put a big emphasis in the way we work to learn by doing. So constantly reflecting, not necessarily hosting big workshops talking about, okay, what did we learn? What have we? But in every meeting, in every way, in the way we approach everything, we look at learn by doing. So this is our deep demonstration model that we followed. There are many systems in innovation models. This is just one, and it's the one we've developed. So this is probably a few months out of date now at this stage, but this just gives a bit of an idea of some of the stuff we've been doing over the last couple of years. We have 24 core partners. So these are the members of our consultative group. which includes the Department of Agriculture, Department of Environment, Department of Enterprise, Trade and Employment, Department for Higher Education, Department of the Taoiseach. I think there's 5 departments. I think that's right. Then, various state agencies, Board Bia, Teagasc, EPA, academics, and we have farming organizations, financial organizations. I'm probably leaving out a few there as well. So we've a broad church that kind of guides our work, and they approve our portfolio and guide the work. There's a lot of value chain actors then involved over in our stakeholder engagement. We spend a lot of time and effort. It's probably 80% of my work is stakeholder engagement of some form or other. We've had lots of workshops focused on particular topics or on the broader kind of systems transition piece. We run capability building courses, fairly limited on that at the moment, but we'd like to expand it. We've, obviously we're commissioned by the department to deliver stuff. So we have quite a few reports that we've developed already, and we will be developing more. And then we had a big conference in Dublin last September where we invited people from not just all over Ireland, but all over Europe to attend to kind of not kickstart, but to create some momentum around what we're doing. So these are just some of the reports and stuff that we've done. I'm not going to go into them all in detail. We do try to link our work across the different projects that we work on around Europe as well. Key ones here around a mapping of policy innovations around Europe in particular, but including some other countries outside Europe. The agri-food systems map, which is kind of a snapshot of where we're at, based on a kind of a framework that Wageningen has developed. So a few bits and pieces there, and they're all available on our website. Feel free to download them or ask me for a copy, and I can get it sent on to you. So what is our deep demonstration portfolio and how did we develop it? So we went out and we talked to a lot of people, and read an awful lot of documents that were already there. And we came up with a list of 275 projects, what we call project ideas. Some of these were new in that they came up through our discussions. Many of them weren't. Many of them were either recommendations in existing reports or documents or plans, or were already being implemented, like some of the CAP strategic plan stuff. None of these were our ideas. They were all came up from our stakeholders. So then we asked our consultative group to prioritize this list, and we thought we'd come up with like 30 or 40 things that they prioritized, but lo and behold, everything was important. So we said we can't communicate 270 ideas to people, so we had to kind of develop them out and group them and tease out exactly how we could integrate them all into something that could function. So what we've done is we've fitted them all into these 7 flagships. And I guess one of the key areas here to notice is that the top 3 of these flagships are very much focused on beyond 2030. We found in our work that there's a huge amount of research and technologies and innovation already there that will help us achieve 2030 targets. What is needed really is to start the pipeline for 2040 and 2050. So that was where, in terms of real innovation, I guess, whereas the 2030 targets is about scaling, the 2040, 2050 targets is about innovation. So as you see there, the first one is around coming up with a vision for 2050. The second one is about new value chains or new products from existing value chains. Third one is around promoting the place-based circular bioeconomy. Fourth one around carbon farming, nature credits, so payments for ecosystem services. Fifth one around climate neutral beef, and don't hold me to the climate neutral beef terminology. It could be sustainable beef, it could be something else. Whatever it is, we will need to define what that actually means. 6 is around dairy and accelerating emission reductions in dairy, and 7 is around growing and diversifying the tillage sector, which is aligned with government policy. Sorry, excuse me. So you'll see then, because we have limited resources, we have been asked to kind of focus on 4 of them there that are highlighted. And those are the ones I'm just going to present to you briefly on here now, so you get an idea what we're working on. So the first one is around reimagining Ireland's land and agri-food system. As you can imagine, setting a 2050 vision for the agri-food sector comes with a lot of political baggage, I guess, and we need to be very careful how we do this. So we're very much working hand in glove with the department on this one to make sure we don't step on anyone's toes or go beyond our remit. But we do feel that ourselves and the department, I suppose, no one speak for them, would feel that this is necessary in order to give a sense of de-risking long-term investments in the agri-food sector. What we want to do is very much create this framework for fostering innovation while building on existing strengths. So give a bit of direction that will drive innovation in a particular direction. The other thing we kind of want to do in this one is, and it's probably linked a bit to some of Anne's work, is look at how can we integrate creativity and younger generations and use culture as a means to harness and drive the transition. You know, we've had Professor PJ Matthews from UCD come in and talk to us about the Irish revival period and the GAA and the formation of the co-op movement and all that back in the early 1900s and up to 1920 or so, and how their mantra was better lives, better farming, better business, or something like that, and how that could really actually still resonates today. So at the moment on this one, we have a 12-month work plan, and once that's delivered, we will look at another 12-month work plan for next year. Focusing on we're doing some focus groups at the moment with diverse stakeholders to kind of see what they think the vision is, and then we're going to work with existing modelers to kind of look at their models and see how the findings of our focus groups can be built into their modeling. Sorry, just to mention, I'm getting a few messages on Teams here saying people are logging in on Teams. So I'm not sure if anybody else is getting those as well.
I'll just check about those. I hope they're not disturbing you.
No
I'll
problem.
do messages. Thank you.
No, it's fine. It's fine. It just popped up just in case you're not seeing them. People trying to get in. So that's our flagship one. The next one we're working on is the circular bioeconomy. So with this one, we have worked with a kind of, again, a broad church of stakeholders to identify priority areas that we want to focus on. And we've come up with 3 key areas, which I cannot remember off the top of my head. One is biochar, one is around kind of biomethane, anaerobic digestion, and the third one, I can't remember it off the top of my head. And my colleague leads on these first two, sorry. So that's been developed out, and we are currently applying for various funding streams for those, and looking to keep that pipeline coming in on that. So for this one, we're very much looking at, are there existing calls for proposals or projects that we can build collaborations on and link together. And I know University of Galway has been part of one of those submissions there recently as well, around the biochar one. Yeah, so that one is firing ahead. The fourth one then is probably the one that probably gets the most interest, and one that I'm working on directly. So we're partnering up with the Climate Division in the Department of Agriculture to develop the National Carbon Farming Framework, which is a commitment under the Climate Action Plan for this year. Probably a little bit behind schedule on this one at the moment, but hopefully it will be coming out for public consultation very, very soon. I've been saying that for a couple of months now, so just wait to see what happens. But essentially what that will hopefully do is, what we're aiming to do with this then is the document comes out for public consultation. We will develop a demonstration project around this, aligned to whatever's in that framework. Essentially on this one, we are looking beyond just carbon removals in soil or in trees and hedgerows. We are looking at emissions reductions. We are looking at biodiversity improvements, and we're looking at water quality improvements. We want to include all of those together, if at all possible. Now, we may have to start with stuff we have data for already and layer in other stuff as we can. But the ambition is to go quite broad with this, which is much broader in scope than the current CRCF regulation, the Carbon Removals and Certification Framework coming out of the EU. But we are very heavily engaged in what's happening at EU level and making sure we are aligned with what they have, but while also developing something that we think will work for Irish agri-food producers. So hopefully by next year we'll have a large scale, and what large scale means, I'm not quite sure. We have to get agreement on the scope of it, but a large scale demonstration project that will help us answer a lot of the unknowns. There's a lot of questions around payments for ecosystem services, and not least around who's going to pay and how much will they pay, and will it be enough to incentivize farmers? All that needs to be figured out. There's a lot of schemes and opportunities out there. Methodologies need to be harmonized. There's a huge amount here, and I'm sure you'll have lots of questions, so I can answer them afterwards. And then the final flagship that we're working on at the moment is around accelerating emissions reductions in the dairy sector. So for this one, it's slightly different. It would seem similar, I suppose, to carbon farming, and there is an awful lot of overlap across all of these, obviously. That's the point of having an interconnected portfolio. But what we've worked on with this one is trying to create I don't want to say a definition, but the boundary conditions for sustainable dairy production. And we've worked with an organization called Common Land and the Bioregional Weaving Lab, who work with them down in Waterford, on their four returns approach, sorry. So they use your environmental, your social, your economic, and then they have a fourth one called inspiration pillar, which we felt was really important because it really looks at, do I feel as a farmer that I will be in business in 10 years' time? Do I feel as a farmer that I have a business to hand over to the next generation, or I have somebody, if not the next generation in my family, somebody or someone who will take over the land? And also that if you're not inspired to change, you won't change. So it's getting into this positive mindset. So we think that's really important, and all our stakeholders kind of agree with that, which is great. And obviously the social bit is around well-being and all that. There's a lot of work already done on all of these bits individually, but none of it is properly tied together to say this farm is more sustainable now than it was at the start, on all four aspects. So we're still trying to pin down within each of the four pillars the key metrics, but the ones under the environmental will be very much aligned, obviously, with what's in the carbon farming framework. So this one, we're currently trying to pull together funders to get this moving. We have identified a co-op that really wants to work with us and wants to scale this out to 400 farmers, their supply base. So this will be quite a large scale project when we get it up and running. We're just trying to align on the funding and get everybody's funding commitments at the same time. But that is well advanced, well designed. We all agree what we're going to do on this one. It's just a matter of organizing the funding around it now. So that is the four flagships we're working on at the moment. I didn't mention the other three. I'm happy to take questions on the other three as well if you want. This graphic gives a bit of an idea of some of the partners we're working with both on the individual flagships and overall in the consultative group. Obviously with each of these things, we'd love to have more people, but it's not always possible to get everybody in the room. So if you don't see the Ryan Institute mentioned there, I know Charlie was kind enough to organise a venue for one of our workshops way back at the start, and I know we've been engaged on the flagship 3 there as well. There's a few things going on. And then this is just our team, and this is kind of evolves a bit. So I'm based in Ireland here. My colleague Saskia, just kind of taken over a little bit from her recently. My colleague Denise, whom some of you way well have met at various events, she leads on flagship 1 and 3. Karen is a new recruit this year and supports myself and Denise on the flagships. And then I have a bunch of colleagues all across Europe working on various different aspects of the project as well. So that is it. I will stop sharing now. I don't know if I stopped the time or not. Nobody told me to stop, so I hope I'm okay.
He told you to stop. You're absolutely perfect. Thanks, Stewart. And thanks to all the colleagues who joined. I hope that those who tried to join on Teams were able to find their way onto Zoom. If you have any questions, just to my colleagues online or actually here in the room in the Orbison, please either raise your hand or pop it in the chat function, or take the hot seat here beside me on my right. Stewart, thank you for that. Can I just start at the basics, I suppose, with Ireland's ambitions, which are I find them very inspirational and wonderful. I remember at the UN Food Systems Summit, when the national development plans for food systems were being presented, Food Vision 2030 was really, given a lot of prominence. It's very, very ambitious. Do you want to comment a little bit, first of all, on the achievement of those ambitions, first of all, and then second of all, I'm very curious about how Ireland can show leadership to other countries, and how can the leadership with Food Vision 2030 and these deep demonstrations then be possibly transferred? Is there any plan to transfer them to teach and lead in other parts of the world?
Okay, there's quite a bit there, Anne. I guess, look, in terms of, there was a report came out recently saying that on the policy level, Ireland has gone from being a climate laggard to a climate leader.
Yeah.
And I think the single biggest thing that we have done is the climate bill. It's huge. And setting sectoral targets and sectoral ceilings and carbon budgets and all that stuff, absolutely transformational policy. So where we're at now, though, is, I wouldn't say it's too little too late. I would say that's the North Star that we've set for ourselves in terms of 2030 targets. I can see 2040 targets coming very soon, because they're going to come out from the EU soon enough, so we'll have to set them as well. And then our 2050 net zero economy targets. So we have those. What we also have then is probably close to 20 years of slowly building up our capabilities to deliver sustainability. There's been a huge amount of investment in research, innovation, on all these things. What I would say, though, is it doesn't have that single point to aim towards, which it does now in the last couple of years. So what we find in our work is that, now I'm not speaking for the department, I'm speaking for myself here, what I've observed. We find that there's nobody out there saying we shouldn't do this. We shouldn't try to be more sustainable. But there are lots of people saying that I don't believe we can. Sure, like we have, even though there's lots of people saying we can, and we have the technology and the practices, and we know what we have to do, most people don't really believe that we will. And I think that's a bit of a mindset shift. We can if we really want to. It's about, do we really want it? And how much emphasis and effort are we really willing to put into this transition? It's not going to be painless, no way, but it can be done. And I think, and that links to kind of how Ireland can show leadership on this. We are showing leadership on this. We don't realize, because we're so internalized on a lot of this stuff. Most countries in Europe, number one, most countries in Europe, their agricultural emissions are 10% of their overall emissions profile. In Ireland, it's 38%. We have a much bigger challenge than anyone else.
Yeah.
That in the agri-food sector, hands down, nobody compares to us. Even the closest people would be half what we are, kind of thing. So it's a massive challenge for us. And as I said at the start, we have to balance the environmental sustainability with the economic and the social. And we have to recognize, for most people in the sector do recognize it, but people outside it might not, that the economics of this is crucial to rural sustainability. You know, in 2022, which admittedly was a peak year for dairy, you had, it was 16 or 19 billion being paid out in nut checks. Where does that money go? It goes into your local GAA club, your local shop, your local car dealer, all these things. It doesn't go off into offshore accounts or tax havens, mostly anyway. I don't think there's many farmers in that kind of level. So it's hugely important. So we cannot just gloss over that, or you will end up having huge social problems. So we have to manage that transition in a just way, which is obviously something I'm sure you're all familiar with. In terms of the leadership bit, let's just take the carbon farming one, for instance. You know, Ireland has been talking about carbon farming for 5 or 6 years, at least, if not longer. We've been talking about payments for ecosystem services for over a decade. We've loads of EIPs who've been working on results-based models and all this kind of stuff. So we know how to do this stuff. Our current CAP strategic plan has the Acres scheme, which is essentially a results-based scheme, mainly focused on biodiversity, not much on carbon, probably. So in terms of where we're at, in terms of our data, we have SDAS and SBLAS. We have emissions data from 60,000 farms in the country up to IPCC level of accuracy or acceptability. In carbon farming, then we're looking at incorporating biodiversity, water quality, emissions reductions, and removals. The CRCF is just looking at removals and a few other bits and pieces. We are showing leadership in this. People around Europe are looking, Jesus, you're doing that. That's what we all want to do, but we're nowhere near it. Whereas we have the potential to go and do these things. So I think we are showing leadership, but Ireland being Ireland and Irish people being Irish people, we're not American. And apologies if I'm criticizing our stereotyping anybody on the call. But we don't shout from the rooftop that we're doing brilliant when we can't prove it.
Yeah.
So that's just our nature. And I don't think that's a bad thing.
Stewart, I have a question I want to follow up with around social and cultural innovation in a moment. But Charlie's popped a question into the chat function, which I will scroll down and read. Can you comment at this stage on which flagships are likely to facilitate the fastest progress towards targets, and which flagships face the biggest challenges to facilitate movement? Is that the end of the question?
Yeah, that's
towards the targets.
A good question, Charlie, and not a dissimilar one to one I got in our consultative group meeting a couple of weeks ago from the Department of the Taoiseach. The first thing I will say is, and this is the answer that the department gave at that meeting, was our initiative with the Department of Agriculture is a very new way of working for the department. It's not the norm. And we've done some insights gathering on this, and we're fairly confident that it is a different way of working. So the resources they're pumping in are significant enough, but in the grand scheme of things, they're quite modest. So the aim for our work is to scale, prove, and scale again. And there's only so much we can do. Now, that being said, which of our flagships has the biggest potential to help us achieve the targets? I suppose I'll go back to my safe answer, which is they're all connected and they're all important. And if we don't do them all, we won't achieve the systems change, essentially. And I would believe that to be the case. However, and I could be biased on this because it's one of the ones I'm working on most closely, the payments for ecosystem services piece for me is foundational to a shift to sustainable agricultural production. If you want to call it regenerative ag or whatever you want to call it, I don't care. But if we don't value the ecosystem services, and I mean by value, put a monetary value on them, we will never be fully sustainable. And that's what I believe. Now, whether that's possible or not, who will pay it? The consumer does not look like they want to pay it. Our consumers are in 180 countries around the world. So how do we find out if they're willing to pay it? You know, I know in the dairy sector, for instance, Irish dairy processors are under massive pressure to make commitments around 25, 30% reduction targets by 2030. And they're not getting paid anything extra to deliver that. So who's going to pay? Big question marks there. But I think if we can figure out a mechanism that rewards farmers enough to do to make the changes that we want to see them make, I think then we're away with it. Long term, past post 2050, then you're talking about paying for maintenance of those things. That's a whole different ballgame. So there's a lot in it, but for me, valuing ecosystem services is, for me, foundational to a just transition to sustainable agriculture. Obviously, you can't forget the social, the economic bit. That's part of the economic, but you can't forget the social bit and potentially the inspirational piece as well. But that is foundational for me.
Stewart, thanks for that. There's another question that I want to get to before we run out of time. Just reading one of the Climate KIC reports that mentions bringing warming impacts of methane to zero. How evolved is thinking on setting an appropriate methane target for Ireland among policymakers in your view?
This sounds like someone I've been speaking to before, because this is a hobby horse of mine. Well, considering what I just said, it's a cornerstone of that foundation. I think it's critical. It's critical for multiple reasons. And I was having this conversation with some colleagues this morning. We need to figure out, okay, number one, it's just transition. It's not fair, in my opinion, to expect a livestock farmer to mitigate 100% of their emissions, because ultimately that means no more livestock. In time, you can mitigate it for a while. Eventually those trees or whatever will get fully grown and you'll have to get rid of your livestock. So that's not fair. It's also not aligned with the IPCC, which says we're aiming for, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's a 50% reduction by 2050 of methane from all sources. So why should we have to reduce methane emissions from agriculture by 100%? I don't get it. It's one of these policy inconsistencies. Now, do I agree with GWB Star? Not really either. I don't understand it fully. It just seems like a bit of a fudge to get out of doing anything to me. Where I would be kind of considering is that we need to set an ambitious stretch target for methane emissions reductions from agriculture for 2050. Be that, the global methane pledge is, what is it, 30% by 2035 or something like that? Or the global methane hub. Other countries have set 10, 20% targets, whatever. Set it, make it at least theoretically achievable, but stretch us, and then, okay, park the rest of your methane emissions, take them off your farm balance sheet, which I hope we would do a balance sheet approach, and then you mitigate the rest. And I think that's the way we should go. We are currently having conversations within both our dairy and carbon farming flagships. We are looking at creating the space to have that policy discussion, to come to some kind of, hopefully, conclusion, and to direct policy on that. It is critical. It is about being fair. It's very much about also promoting behavior change and this inspiration piece that, I worked out the numbers for Farm Zero C in Shinnock down in Cork. They have about 1,000 tons of emissions. 70% of it is methane. So that's, let's say you go for a 50% reduction in methane, take 350 tons off your balance sheet, you're left with 650. Over 20 years, it is very doable for a farm of 200 cows to either potentially even just, which I wouldn't recommend, but just to buy enough land to plant in forestry. over 20 years, you could do that and offset all your remaining emissions. I wouldn't recommend doing that. There's still a lot of scope for reducing emissions as well, obviously, but that would be possible. And when you get into the thing of, oh, that's possible, it's not impossible anymore, and it makes it much more doable. So I think that is critical, and I think there is certainly a willingness in the department to discuss it and figure out how we're going to deal with it. I think that's where we're finding at the moment anyway. So, but there's a lot of implications to making those kind of policy changes that need to be teased out and understood. So I wouldn't be rushing into it, certainly. And just because I think it doesn't mean it should happen or will happen. So yeah.
Stewart, we have another question here from Una, and who says that understanding the subsidy input into rural life, that's fine, but it would be interesting to see a breakdown by farm size in Ireland.
Sorry, I don't get the question, sorry.
So the question is, thanks, Stewart, and understand the subsidy input into rural life, but it would be interesting to see a breakdown by farm size in Ireland.
Oh, okay. So the subsidy, well, I suppose the comments I was making around the 19 billion was just milk checks. So that's not subsidies. Yeah. That's just milk checks. Obviously there is, CAP is shifting, and they're trying to move it away from the bigger farmers getting more to being a bit more, the smaller farmers getting a bit more chunk of the pie. And that's been happening for quite a while now. Farmers will push back on that. And, I'm from a farming background myself, so I can say this. Farmers who, you probably have about 20% of farmers who are producing 80% of the food, roughly, let's say that. Or at least who are making a full-time living from farming. Is it fair that the person who probably doesn't really want to make a lot of money from farming, is maybe part-time farming, keeps the land because of the social cultural connection to it? It could even be a tax write-off, which I'm sure there's lots of these people out there. Is it fair that they're getting subsidies and the person who's producing the food gets less? I don't know. There's arguments both ways. I can see it. Why would you give a subsidy to someone who's already making money? Is the other side of it. So, but I think there's a lot of nuances in the figures that need to be teased out. I think if you look at from an environmental perspective, your small farmer is likely much closer to being, let's call it, climate neutral than your larger farmer.
They're less likely.
Much more likely to be climate neutral.
Much more likely, yeah.
Now, on the flip side of that, the global market wants to look at your carbon footprint, your emissions efficiency, which they will not be good on because they're much less intensive. Yeah. So that's a circle that needs to be squared, or a round peg that needs to be fitted in a square hole. And it's really is the global market, because we are a global producer. They require emissions intensity figures, and they're comparing what we produce with something that's produced somewhere else per litre of milk, per kilogram of beef. Yeah. And I think that this, take last year as an example, overall 4.6% reduction in agricultural emissions, brilliant. The emissions efficiency figures went the other direction. So the contracts that the dairy co-ops and maybe the meat suppliers have signed with their buyers saying they'll improve their carbon footprint, they're going in the wrong direction, even though for Ireland and for the world, it's better. Yeah. That just doesn't make sense. And these are some of the inconsistencies that need to be teased out. It's not that global corporates aren't willing to talk about these things. There's no issue there. They're certainly willing to do it. But you can understand it from their perspective. They're trying to look at their supply chains and, well, how do I decarbonize it? Yeah. And that's an easy metric to use. And it's been the kind of accepted one for a while. So look, there's a lot going on here. I've gone off topic there a little bit, but no,
not at all. No, Stewart, it's really, really interesting. I was going to ask a question, but I leave it at a comment. Really, I'm so interested about how your work and the work of EIT Climate KIC and the Department of Ag really takes in together the technological innovation and the social and cultural. So our work here in the Rhine Institute has life scientists, natural scientists, earth scientists, social scientists, and political science. So it's just really, I think, heartening to see this kind of interdisciplinary agriculture and food systems work, not only in science, but also that science policy interface. So it's probably a conversation for another day, but I think we really got the sense of the appreciation of all those. And I love the inspiration pillar, you know, because it resonates with a lot of us who come from farming backgrounds as well in Ireland. So I think with that, we'll draw the webinar to a close. And thank you so much, Stuart, for your time. And thank you to all my colleagues who attended the webinar. This will be available on the Rhine Institute website. And Stuart, if it's okay with you, we'll put your slides up as well. And I think the contact details are there. But best wishes and thanks for attending today.
No problem, no problem. My pleasure. If anybody wants to reach out to connect with us, please feel free.
Will do. Thanks a million. Bye-bye, everyone. Take care.